Hidden gems. We know and love them for their incredible underdog stories in the world of sports and esports. Nothing is more inspiring than watching someone grind from absolutely nothing all the way to the very top. And the Overwatch League is no exception to this in the world of gaming. In fact, we've actually witnessed a lot of fun stories from individual players throughout the years. But who stands out the most of the pack? Well, that's what I'm here to hopefully help answer for you today. Here's my top 10 hidden gems in Overwatch League history. Number 10. Checkmate. Checkmate was seen as an interesting prospect by many when the Florida Mayhem picked him up in 2021. He had good flexibility and found decent results overall in Korean contenders. He wasn't a diamond in the rough, so to speak. There was some hype around him, but there still were questions on how big his role would be since Yaki was on this team too. And we kind of saw those concerns play out in real time as he barely played at all. And to add some insult to injury, he was forced into playing main tank for the first time in his entire career, and as we all know, he would become a bit of a meme on that Reinhardt. He just wasn't getting the real chance to prove himself as a player, and sadly, it didn't feel like Florida would be holding on to him or any other players heading into 2022. And just when it seemed like Checkmate was finally out of a job, he tried out for Florida a second time that year. And this time, he would earn the starting spot and he earned the full trust of his new coaching staff. And taking this second chance on him would pay off greatly as seen by what happened last year. He played extremely well. Genuinely like a top 10 flex DPS in the league, and in large part it did help Florida find a playoff spot and tournament success, and he was overall just a key piece of their new core and still is. After becoming a meme, being on the bench, and being a member of that failed 2021 roster, I don't think anybody foresaw him being this important towards the Mayhem or any team in general. One of the Mayhem's greatest failures turned out to be a real hidden gem that put them back on the right track. It was an unexpected outcome for a Mayhem team that is now heading towards a much brighter future. Number 9. Dreamer. Now, he makes the cut as a true certified diamond in the rough. To say he was an unknown would be an absolute understatement. He was skilled enough to make contenders, yes, but not in any of the places you'd really think. He might be Korean, but he had no place among Korean contenders. And if you thought he'd maybe go to another strong region like China, EU, or NA, you'd also be wrong. Dreamer competed in Australia, where the competition, no offense Australians, is arguably the weakest and where not many prospects get a real opportunity. He played for one of the better teams, Sydney Drop Bears, which was cool, but no real results showed for it. Most fans likely had no idea who he even was when the Valiant picked him up. He was a complete unknown from a place very rarely explored. So naturally, the expectations were rather low for the guy, and he had no guarantee of starting either since Gig was also an option on that team for the main tank position. Like the Valiant in general though, Dreamer was just expected to be a non-factor. Just this mediocre tank who likely would not keep up with any of the exciting prospects or veterans of the game. But by the time he got his first start, it quickly became apparent that this was far from the case. Dreamer came in and made an immediate difference. He was a little undisciplined at the start for sure, especially as the Valiant had their ups and downs, but once he picked up on a couple of things and the team got into a rhythm, he really came into his own as a solid professional player. And I'm not just talking serviceable, he was arguably above average. Not like top 5 at his position, but still pretty easy to notice. He was explosive, consistent, and a real leader, and he showed it across a lot of different metas too, as it felt like while his Orisa and Winston were definitely his best, he could genuinely play just about anything classified as a main tank relatively well. He more than held his own against numerous veterans of the game and played an instrumental role in giving the Valiant a stable front line that allowed for them to win their first playoff game in franchise history. Not even something that the 2018 Valiant could pull off. And even though it was to a lesser extent, I'd say that he was still definitely of use to the Outlaws 1 year later as well. He actually won a good bit of games at the Overwatch League level. His record as a starter was pretty respectable, and at his best, definitely one of the better main tank players in the league. From an unknown player from an unpopular region to a respected multi-year career. Not too shabby. Number 8. FD God. Oh yeah, you best believe FD God is making an appearance on this list. From the beginning of his career all the way up until late 2019, FD God was largely a mystery. He was kind of just vibing and doing his thing. There was no real hype surrounding his name, and his results in contenders weren't anything to talk about too. He He was an all-around raw prospect with a ton to prove. But in the 2019 World Cup, something changed. FD managed to secure the starting main support role on Team France, and from there, he kinda ran with it. Maybe it was the extra attention or just having this opportunity in general, but he played with a ton of confidence, and his Lucio was a real spectacle to watch. He was a real star in the making for France, and that is when Overwatch League teams began to take notice. And it wouldn't be long after where he'd find himself drawing interest from the Paris Eternal. And in spite of a longtime veteran like Cruz being there, FD quickly surpassed him in the starting lineup and never looked back. And literally within that first week, he was dominating on Lucio. People could not stop talking about how exciting he was. And as Paris continued to improve and compete in big-time games, he made a serious habit of showing up, especially on control maps. He was genuinely one of the most clutch players in the entire league on his role. And by the time we reached the end of 2020, FD was largely considered as a top 5 main support in the Overwatch League. And while his tail wouldn't be so great on the Shock 1 year later, he still did manage to play in the league for 2 years, and he was an elite player at his role at one point. And for a guy who was unheard of prior to the World Cup, I'd say that this classifies him as one of the better hidden gems in Overwatch history. Number 7. EQO. Maybe a surprise for some of you out there, but EQO definitely fits the description that you're looking for. Before Overwatch League, there just wasn't much to show from him. A few low finishes in some scattered tournaments, and a lone World Cup appearance was all he had. And when the 2018 Fusion announced their roster, EQO was not expected to be a major contributor. They had Shadowburn, one of the most exciting players in the world at the time. What reason would there ever be to play EQO over him, you know? Shadowburn was considered to be one of the best flex DPS on the planet, a Genji and Pharah extraordinaire at the Overwatch League level. And at the start, that was clearly the case, as EQO was constantly sitting on the bench and watching Shadowburn dominate with ease. So it was kind of a shocker when Philly changed it up during Stage 2 by replacing Shadowburn with EQO. Who was this guy? Why was he playing over Shadowburn? Well, the Fusion's improved performance, as well as a Stage 2 finals appearance, made the reasoning pretty apparent. Not only did he prove to be surprisingly flexible and dangerous, but he seemed to provide better synergy with the team. He was a less resource-driven player, which helped out the likes of Carpe and Fraggy quite a bit. But don't just think of it as Shadowburn being a poor fit, because EQO honestly looked really good from the moment that he got the starting job until the very end, and he kept it. He never let it go. Philly's decision to sign him despite being an unknown was largely justified. He was a star flex DPS who could play a mean Genji, but also hit scan to give the Fusion maximum flexibility. What EQO brought to the table was invaluable, and he made it clear time after time that he was a really solid piece to have during the Philly Fusion's playoff run. And from there, he kind of just became a staple of the Fusion. He always played and flexed whenever it was necessary, both in 2019 and even in 2020 when he was benched. He always found ways to be extremely important towards his team's success, especially in that late part of 2020 during Genji and Ekko metas. Honestly, what he did during the Summer Showdown against the likes of Sparkle and that Paris team alone is proof of just how much he meant to the Fusion in those first 3 years. He was always there for them through thick and thin and was kind of an unsung hero. He came up clutch in some of the most important matches in the franchise's history. And for somebody who was largely expected to ride the bench as a backup his whole career, this screams top-level hidden gem. And at number 6, we're sticking with the Fusion. This time, it's gonna be Sato. Regardless of being compared to Miro on the ranked ladder back in the day, Sato really had nothing to suggest that he would be a top-level Overwatch League player. It was a complete and utter shot in the dark when Philly decided to pick him up. Sato literally had zero competitive experience before joining the Fusion in 2018. Yes, you heard me right. He never played a single match for any team professionally. I don't think any Fusion fan quite knew what they were going to get with this guy as a result, especially when he ended up getting suspended for a whopping 30 games before the season even started. But then, he kind of just went out there and did his thing. He ignored the drama and kept that head of his way down. He made an immediate difference as well for the Fusion multiple times. The first was, of course, helping them make the Grand Finals in 2018, but then we'd have him be a second hidden gem of sorts 2 years later. We all know the story of how bad him and Philly looked in GOATS in 2019. I mean, his Ryan got no support whatsoever and he looked awful. He got a lot of criticism, so the expectation naturally was that Sato had peaked and that keeping him for another year was a major mistake. But to the surprise of many of his haters, including myself to a certain extent, all he really needed was better help at the end of the day. Because once he got a better backline, Sato began to dominate in ways we've never seen before. He was a really strong player regardless of the meta and was generally a focal point of the Fusion strategy. And it wasn't a stretch to call him a top 3 main tank in the Overwatch League. And that in itself kind of makes him a hidden gem times 2. Once for being reliable despite being unknown, and twice for developing into a surprise star that helped the Fusion finish with one of the best records in the league in 2020. In 3 years of investment and all of the ups and downs, the Fusion still managed to get multiple playoff runs out of this one man. Most Philly fans probably didn't expect this level of play out of him, hence why he comes in at the number 6 spot. Sliding into number 5 is Fitz. I find Fitz to be a must for the simple fact that I can literally remember exactly what I thought of him from a video I made nearly 4 years ago. At the time, Seoul had their clear-cut stars. This team was all about the backline plus Fleta and Fissure. Fitz was there, but he wasn't thought of as anything special. I for one saw him as a long-term project that Seoul could potentially develop and mold over time, then maybe play him like 1 year later. Because prior to the Overwatch League, Fitz only played for irrelevant teams in Open Division and Contenders Trials. So the fact that Seoul Scouting decided to give someone so inexperienced a chance was pretty crazy, as it's the Dynasty. This isn't some ordinary team. They are known for going all in on big-time talent. It all seemed really weird, hence why he had raw prospect and long-term project written all over him. Or so I thought. Because by Stage 2 2019, he was already a starter with a reliable Zarya and even a good Doomfist come playoff time. Yes, you heard me right. A guy with no real criteria forced his way into a critical role on the freaking Dynasty, a team that is supposed to exhibit excellence for the sake of an entire country. This alone immediately makes him a hidden gem. But the next few years after is what truly cemented his legacy, as he'd not only play extremely well in a grand final scenario in 2020, but he became one of the best hit scans by the time we hit Season 4. Literally, since his rookie year when he was just a nobody, he was an important starter after just a few months of learning. He picked up on a lot of things extremely fast, and all the credit in the world has to go to the Dynasty scouting for this one. He's been a great player the last 4 years or so, and he shows zero signs of slowing down, from Open Division to League Superstar. Unreal. Number 4. Ans. Yeah, we just had to include the sniping legend on this one. Prior to the Overwatch League, Ans was just an okay hitscan player for Blossom, a Korean contenders team that never did better than 10th place. Ans was constantly at the bottom of the barrel, and he would actually retire temporarily for about a 5-month span at one point. There may be some questions about how much he wanted it and if he was even good enough. I don't think anybody was thinking he'd find success in his career, let alone make the Overwatch League. I can still clearly remember the general confusion of the public when the shock announced him. I remember exactly where I was and what I was thinking too. I was chilling at a restaurant with some friends when the shock decided to reveal Ans like in a really exciting way as their newest member, and all I can remember thinking is, huh? Who's this guy? Are the Shock signing him as a streamer? If not, he was surely just gonna be a backup who learned the system for a while, right? But sure enough, he was there to be their new, dedicated hitscan, and I can still remember Super and others saying that this guy was an absolute freak who you should not sleep on, and as it turned out, those opinions were absolutely valid, as in a matter of months, Ans was basically the talk of the town. His deadly accuracy on the Widowmaker was horrifying. I mean really, once we saw him play that Widowmaker, that was it man. He was so dominant on her. Some people even considered him to be the best widow in league history by the time 2020 ended. He became a staple to the Shock lineup and one of their deadliest players. He was running circles around some of the best players on the planet, even though people didn't even know who this guy was prior to the league starting that year. And when it was all said and done, Ance ended up winning a Roll Star award that year, and he played a huge role in the Shock taking home the 2020 Grand Finals. He played really well in that series. He cemented that much of a legacy in just one season as a complete unknown. He went from this guy that people thought would be a dedicated streamer to a champion who helped put the Shock over the top at the time. Ance is easily one of the greatest deals in league history. Number 3. Striker. A pretty obvious one for those of you who started watching in 2018. Striker, along with most of Boston at the time, were serious underdogs with a ton to prove. Striker in particular played in Apex one time for an unpopular team by the name of Rock's Orcas. Said team ended up barely qualifying for a tournament to begin with, and they went 0-3 in the group stage. If you thought Striker was going to be something at the Overwatch League level in the 2018 preseason, you must have been a massive fan of him, because I can tell you right now, Boston were considered to be one of the least talented rosters on the surface at this time, and yet they'd end up coming out and popping off like crazy. And at the forefront of that success would obviously be their true carry, aka Striker. He basically willed this team to the first ever undefeated stage in league history and a Stage 3 final. And even after he left Boston, Striker continued to be a superstar as well as a multi-time champion, a finals MVP, and one of the greatest Tracer players of all time. And it all came into form just because the Uprising decided to scout him and take a chance on him back in the day while building their budget roster. It felt like that team was supposed to fail, and that includes Striker. I don't think anybody foresaw him having such a decorated career. When it's all said and done, Boston discovering his talents when nobody else seemed to care is proof enough that he is a diamond in the rough. From one 2018 player to another, because at number 2, I'm going with my boy Jonak. Now, admittedly, I'm pretty sure some people were kind of already excited about him prior to the start of 2018, but man, I don't think anybody expected New York to get so much out of this guy. And I say that for the simple reason that he came in and immediately became one of the greatest players ever with no prior experience as a pro. Technically, he was on LW Blue for the upcoming Apex Season 4, but they did drop out and forfeit all of their matches, so Jonak basically had a clean slate. The only thing that people really knew was that he was pretty good at Zen. But then we enter Season 1 and we realize just how incredible this pickup actually was. I mean, literally right from week 1, he established himself as the best flex support in the league. His Zenyatta completely outclassed everybody around him, and he helped revolutionize the support position by showing that you really can play around your Zen as a primary playmaker. And for his efforts, he had 2 stage titles and a regular season MVP award. And for a guy that competed in no real tournaments whatsoever beforehand, that is insane. And even though Season 1 was clearly when he was at the most dominant, he was always a damn good player for the rest of his playing career. He's one of the most legendary support players to ever touch the game, and he was pretty much always a top player. And some argue that he was the greatest Zenyatta ever, which is pretty fair. And on top of that, he ranks extremely high across all of the all-time statistics. It's a real shame that he was never able to win that Grand Finals trophy, but at least he still did more than enough to cement his legacy as an all-time great. For what Jonak did for the game, along with his incredible career, I would say that he was a real hidden gem. He wasn't some well-established player like Ryuje Hong or Prophet or anyone like that. He was not a name-brand household name. The Overwatch League was the first opportunity for him to really prove himself, and look what he was able to accomplish. He outclassed a lot of established talent like it was absolutely nothing. The NYXL put their complete faith in him to be one of the best, even though he had no criteria to back it up. As an MVP and a legend of this game, he definitely accomplished a lot for somebody with so little known about him. And that, my friends, is why Jonak absolutely makes this list. And finally, at number 1 is none other than our boy Lip. This one's pretty easy, as Lip is the very definition of a hidden gem that took this league by storm. In 2020, absolutely nobody knew who he was. I'm pretty sure most people just assumed that he'd have a bench role. You know, they still had Diem, they have Fleta. What reason would there ever be to play around him? The Dragons gained a lot of firepower, and he was not seen as one of the main highlights. Lip was a nobody on Blossom previously, just like Ans. His best feat was winning a single game in the group stage of 2018 contenders. Aside from that, him and his squad couldn't even make it through trials. He didn't have the flashy label of somebody like Sparkle, Hanbin, Yaki, or Alarm. He was nowhere near the top of the rookie totem pole. So then when he suddenly just waltzes his way in and immediately catches everybody's eyes as a star player on Sombra and Ashe, it was a real wow factor. And as the Dragons kept winning, he just kept getting better and better and better to the point where people were questioning where the heck he even came from. And his rookie year was only the beginning of his journey. Because honestly, the last 2 years I've seen him elevate to one of the best players in the world. He's arguably been the league's best hitscan player the last 2 years running. A guy who could barely even qualify for contenders has already amassed 3 Role Stars, 2 MVP nominations, a Grand Finals trophy, and a Grand Finals MVP. Forget about Fleta, Void, or anybody else on that team. The real difference maker was a random guy picked up off the streets that the Dragons coaching staff thought I'd promise at the time. The guy that seemed like the weakest part of the rotation at the very beginning was the man to push them over the top and really help them achieve that status of best team in the league. Usually you'd expect this type of impact from a generational talent. This is what you're thinking people like Sparkle and Decay are capable of when they're rookies. Not this random guy that you barely even knew existed. The best way to sum up just how crazy of an approaching storm he was is to show you this leaked DM from Yiska on Twitter. According to his source, Lip was the most slept on rookie coming into the league by far, and he stated that players didn't even realize how scary he was until getting blown away by him in scrims. Supposedly, he was one of the best players some of these people have ever seen. Dude was secretly becoming the Michael Jordan of Overwatch League while pretty much being invisible to the public eye, and by the time his opponents realized what they were dealing with, it was already too late. With budding confidence and a way better support system on Shanghai, Lip became arguably the most slept-on player in Overwatch League history. It's one of the greatest out-of-nowhere success stories you will ever see, hands down. He literally went from nothing on this random contenders team to a god seemingly overnight. And with that said, that's pretty much all I've got for you. Those are my top 10 hidden gems in Overwatch League history. Let me know what you think about this list down in the comments below, and let me know if there's any other big names that I missed out on. And if you enjoyed this video and you want more top 10s just like it, hit that like button and subscribe to my channel to stay up to date with all of my most recent content. And until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.